I was once a bodyguard for Sarah Jessica Parker and actually turned down an opportunity to earn $300,000. Sounds crazy? It is. And it's also totally true. I'll come back to that story in a second. First, let me say that this story it's not a cool story about me being some sort of champion of moral fortitude. It's actually the opposite. It's a story about how I was tempted to sacrifice my values, and I think it's relevant to the environment we're in today because I've seen some people on social media saying that desperate times call for desperate measures, with some going beyond that to suggest doing anything to get a leg up. See, when times are good, it's easy to toe that ethical line. But when times are tough, we may find ourselves tempted to sacrifice our values. The author Stephen Denning, he writes about the ethical dilemmas we face, and he describes one ethical approach as what he calls the robber barons. And he says the robber barons, he says, they have no values other than barefaced greed. They practice a kind of value system that looks only at their own gain. Unfortunately, I know a little bit about the robber baron mentality. In this true story, I actually found myself both vying against the robber baron mentality, but also later being tempted to align my values with theirs. So here's the story. In late 2002, the actress Sarah Jessica Parker, she and her husband Matthew Broderick, they were pregnant with their first child. The paparazzi ringleaders had offered a $300,000 reward to the photographer who delivered the first photos of their new baby. At this time, I had actually just recently left active duty in the Navy, and I was doing some contract work as a bodyguard. And Sarah and Matthew, because I'm on a first name basis with them apparently. Anyway, Miss Parker and Mr. Broderick were being harassed incessantly by the paparazzi. And this is despite the fact that she was still a couple weeks away from her due date. So to counter this, her people hired a security firm to protect her from the harassment of the paparazzi. And I was lucky enough to join that team, and to the best of our ability, we tried to offer her some privacy. And I'll say that it was not an easy task. The photographers, they were everywhere. They were like cockroaches everywhere. They would camp outside her home. They would harass her anytime she showed her face. They would break laws like traffic laws, property laws, anti-harassment laws, anything to ensure that they were closely following her every move. They had zero compassion or consideration for Sarah or for anyone else for that matter, including each other. It was truly an anything goes to get that cash prize mentality. So one afternoon, Sarah finally goes into labor and we rush her to the hospital. I went back to my hotel room and came back to the hospital later that evening to take my post as her guard outside of her hospital room door. I was actually sitting right outside of her door when she went into active labor. I heard her going through labor. I heard the whole conversation when their son was born, but that'll remain for them to share if they want. But over the next couple hours, I verified the credentials of the few select people who were, allowed into her private room, but eventually the flow of activity dies down by the late evening, and then I find myself just sitting on a folding chair in a quiet, dimly lit hallway, just reading magazines for the next few hours. So sometime in the very late hours of that night, I don't know, maybe 2 or 3 in the morning, Sarah's private nurse comes out of the room and she's holding the baby. And she explains to me that Sarah and Matthew, they were sleeping, but she had to use the bathroom and she didn't want to put the baby down for fear of waking them. So she asks if I would mind holding the baby for just a few minutes while she runs to the bathroom. Now, of course, I agree, and I got nothing else to do. So I took the baby and she goes and she disappears around the corner, leaving me alone in the hallway with the baby. So as I'm looking at this sleeping baby, I thought about the digital camera in my bag at my feet. Now, I know I'm dating myself. This was 2002, before camera phones. But I knew that I had my camera in my bag, and I thought about how $300,000 would change my life, would be a game changer. I mean, that wasn't just a mortgage payment. That wasn't buying the entire house. And perhaps naively, I probably thought about how no one would even have to know that the photo had come from me, so I could just somehow anonymously collect the money and slip away. And so I thought about that for a second. And then, thankfully, I thought about that code of honor that I had sworn to when I entered the Navy. I thought about the disdain I had developed for the paparazzi as they harassed this otherwise very kind pregnant lady during what was supposed to be a joyful moment for her as she expected her first child. I thought about my own mother. I didn't know what I was going to do. Like, hey, here, Mom, I bought you a car. It was paid for with my soul, by the way, and I'm going to burn in hell for eternity, but, enjoy. I actually knew what she would think about sacrificing my values for money. But most importantly, I thought about the people and the values that I had protected while serving as a SEAL. And I considered the hypocrisy of my own greed against all that I had sworn to be. So I sat there for another 2 or 3 minutes, just watching this brand new, innocent life just sleep soundly in my arms. And then the nurse returned, and I handed the baby back to her, and I went back to reading my magazines. So I finished that shift later that morning, and I went back to my hotel room. And at some point later in that day, I remember watching in disgust as I think it was E.T., Entertainment Television. I think they showed the melee of photographers outside the hospital just fighting with each other to get that first shot of the baby. And at that moment, I thought about how happy I was to not be amongst their kind. So here I sit today with a mortgage that I'll be paying on for another 25 years and college funds that might get my kids through their first 2 years of college. Those are things that $300,000 would have made a lot easier in my life. But I still have my integrity. Integrity from upholding my values, in fact. I was tempted, as Stephen Denning says, to act with only barefaced greed, to act like one of the robber barons. So how is that relevant to the choices you might be facing today? Because in these uncertain times, you might be presented with opportunities for you to cross your own ethical line, where you're at a crossroads and you have to figure out where you draw the line on what lengths you would go to get a leg up, for you to possibly be one of the robber barons. And here's what I'll offer you. Sacrificing your values is a slippery slope. Towing that fine line but never allowing yourself to cross it, it's not easy. But allowing yourself to slip one toe over the line this time, it leads to 2 toes the next time, and then the whole foot, and then the entire leg, and so on. I know that sacrificing my values, even for that once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, such as earning $300,000 for a photo, it actually would not have made me wealthier in happiness, in pride, in honor. In fact, I'm sure it would have quite the opposite effect. So the next time you're tempted to sacrifice your values, I would ask you to reframe that question. What are my other options? How can I get creative to solve my challenges, but still with my dignity intact? And where do I draw the line on this action? Better yet, where would my mama draw the line on my actions? Desperate times, they don't call for desperate measures. They call for innovation and creativity and wildly off-the-wall ideas on how you can solve your problems. That's how you solve those problems, with your ingenuity and your values intact.